Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me and that we're not having any connection issues. Thank you again for joining us for another great webinar in our series of webinars. And thanks for taking time out of your schedules, and especially during family time at night time. Just before I introduce our speaker, some house rules. If you do get, if you've got poor connection or you get kicked out of the room, just refresh your browser or log back in. And you shouldn't have any problems. So the replays, the whole webinar will be recorded, and we will make the replays available to you afterwards. So don't worry if you've missed because of poor connection or you need to go grab a cup of coffee. We will send you a link to the replays afterwards in an email, or you can just reach out to us via our website and we'll send it to you. For our South African veterinarians, you do get CBD points for this webinar, for attending this webinar. So keep a lookout in the chat box. There will be a link posted there that you can click on to enter your details. And once you've completed the attendance register, then we will send you your CBD certificate. The same counts for international vets. If you'd like an attendance certificate, just go ahead, click on the link and enter your details in the attendance form. Otherwise, reach out to us and we will make sure to get that certificate off to you. Okay, now on to our speaker. For our South African veterinarians, I'm sure this speaker needs absolutely no introduction. And for our international delegates, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Richard Burrows. Now, Richard has recently retired from academics, where he worked in the Faculty of Veterinary Science for the University of Pretoria. He was employed there as a wildlife clinician, as well as the director for the Centre of Veterinary Wildlife Studies, where he managed and oversaw quite a few undergraduate and postgraduate studies. Now, before going into academics, Richard was in private wildlife practice for 12 years, and prior to that, he was a zoo veterinarian for over 10 years. So with over 30 years experience in wildlife veterinary medicine, we are incredibly privileged to have him tonight as a speaker for one of our webinars. He's incredibly knowledgeable and has over 25 scientific publications to his name, as well as a couple of very prominent veterinary wildlife and game capture textbooks. So enjoy the talk and feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. What we don't answer during the talk, I will go through afterwards with Richard in our live Q&A session. So hang around afterwards and hopefully we can answer some of your questions. Okay, enjoy. I'll see you guys at the end.
Afternoon, everyone. This is Richard Burrows speaking. First of all, I'd like to thank Wildlife Pharmaceuticals for allowing me to participate in their seminar series. Thank you very much for that. And then also thank you to VetLink for doing all the final administration and posting this particular presentation online. So today we want to have a look at some of the things that probably most of you know a lot about, some things that are probably new. We have been looking in the last couple of lecture presentations at the effects of drugs on various species, how they respond, for example, giraffe to baminal, carnivores to repeated forms of anesthesia and in-flight transport. So we're just going to take a step back today and have a look at what sort of systems there are available that you can possibly select to make your job better in terms of how we are going to get drugs into an animal's body. And then obviously there's some old techniques that are available in terms of funnel traps, snares and other kinds of traps. But probably the first people that specialized in any kind of drug administration would probably have been some of the South American and other Aboriginal tribes that were really, really very, very accurate with their blowpipes and could dart or anesthetize or kill a monkey or an animal in a tree by putting poison onto a blow dart. And they were very, very accurate in this. So arrow poisons have certainly been around for a long time. We're familiar with that from Bushman history as well within South Africa. And then also just the putting of various forms of pharmaceutical ingredients, alcohol and other things into some sort of an attractant like honey to be able to take it further. So if we go back in terms of time, in terms of where we currently are using darts for, probably it started in the early 50s, the early game capture work, early 50s, early 60s, particularly in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania. You're aware of some of the films and movies that have been shot where people would race up alongside a black rhino and lasso them and try and get them down. And it all looks fantastic, but there is no question that the mortalities were enormous. So the first person that really looked at this and tried to develop anything that was in any way practical and repeatable and scientific was probably a British veterinarian called Tony Hartshorn, who lived in East Africa for many, many years. And he developed a series of darts, and he wrote a book about this called The Flying Syringe. And for some of the, if you can find it, I think it will be certainly Afrikaner and well worth the while of trying to get. And they were playing around in those days with things like nicotine, succinylcholine, and even just plain morphine, because that was really all that they had. And we're not going to go into the effects of these drugs now. It's beyond the purpose of this particular talk. But he developed the whole idea of being able to shoot a dart accurately into an animal and repeatedly without killing it, either from the dart itself or to some extent with the use of the anesthetics that would want to be used. So you guys are no doubt aware of all the various kinds of drugs that are available to us now, various forms of opioids, various forms of cyclohexylamines, the antidotes and things that are available to us, a huge selection. So you obviously have to decide what animals you're going to be working. You need to decide what kind of drugs you're going to be using, and sometimes it's a combination of drugs. If you mix the drugs together, are they going to interact? Is there going to be a problem? Can you fit them all into a dart? What size does your dart need to be? How concentrated are the solutions that you're working with? Can they fit into a 1 cc dart, or must you use a 3 cc dart? So these are all kinds of things that you want to be thinking about. So how are we going to get drugs into an animal? Obviously, there's one way of doing it, and that's to mix the pharmaceutical agent into some sort of oral preparation. And that's fairly commonly done in captivity, either in terms of anesthetizing chimpanzees or gorillas or something like that, putting xylitol or some other formulation into Coke or peanut butter. You can do it once, but they won't fall for that trick again. The other way is obviously by some form of hand injection, and we'll have a look at that more in detail, or in the third instance, and that's remote drug delivery, particularly those of darts. So if we have a look at the various pole syringes that are open to us or available to us, you can see on the right-hand side slide, there is a buffalo about to get an injection of some agent, whether it's an antibiotic or whether it's an immobilizing drug. It's the same principle. In the bottom center slide, you can see what is essentially the basis of a pole syringe, which is really just a syringe that is screwed onto a long pole. You pull the plunger back, you inject the drug into the compartment of that particular pole syringe, you screw on the needle onto the front, and then you actually go up to the animal, and then you just jab it directly in like that. One has to be careful that once you start pushing, that you actually get the full dose in. The top center slide are slides of a spring-loaded Dan-inject syringe, which you can actually cock. You fill it with whatever solution you're going to be using, whether it's immobilizing drug, a tranquilizer, or an antibiotic. And I think up to about 7 or 8 cc's can be injected at a time. And because it's got a trigger loaded and it's cocked, you don't really have to push that hard. You just touch the animal, the needle going in, you touch the base of the syringe to the skin of the animal, it releases a trigger mechanism, and then the drug gets injected like that. Very sophisticated, very nice pole syringe to use, and you can see this particular group of operators have got 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 of these pole syringes there ready for use. So very nice to use. The other thing that you can use, certainly as some of our indigenous tribes do, is to use a blowpipe. When I first started in practice, I used to make my own blowpipe syringes, just using a modified 2cc Terumo syringe, but they are really, really not accurate. You have to be very, very well skilled and very well trained even to be able to use a blowpipe on a regular basis. It's fine for short-range work. It's less effective for long-range work. On the left-hand slide, you can see that there is a Dan-Inject pole syringe, pole syringe dart that's ready for use. Beg your pardon, a blowpipe syringe dart ready for use, and then a blowpipe that is going to be used for that purpose in the right-hand slide. It's very difficult to regulate your breathing and the amount of pressure that you're going to be putting behind a blowpipe accurately so that you get consistent distance and consistent penetration. So blowpipes are good in theory, but they've been largely replaced by some sort of darting mechanism or dart gun. So let's have a look at some of these. We obviously know that there are very many different rifles, but equally there are very many different pistols available to us. Some of them are air pressured, some of them are powder charge propelled, and they vary from country to country. And if you have a look on YouTube, you can see all kinds of different constructions of dart guns and darts and how they fit together, but have not become really mainstream. You just need to be aware that there are many, many different kinds available for your use when you finally get to use it. So we have two fundamental systems of which darts are actually propelled out of a dart gun. And the one is to use air pressure, and here we have things like Dan-Inject, Tel-Inject, etc., all the way through to the older models of the capture guns, new dart, and then powder-charged guns, which consist of some of the older guns like capture, new dart. We're going to go through all of these in some degree of detail just now, and then also more recent South African-derived system called Matsumi. And at the top right-hand corner, you can see the wide variety of darts that are available, from a 1cc small little dart all the way up to what seems to be a 5 or 8cc dart at the top of that particular picture. And then below that, a whole variety of dart weapons, dart gun projectors, or dart guns as they're called, that are available for your use. So let's have a look at the darts themselves, and I want you just to focus and try and retain some degree of image of these diagrams in your head. We're going to go through all the darting systems again now in the future, but just retain the principles of how they work, that when we come to explain them again, you've got this picture in the back of your mind. In the top of the slide is what's described as a generic air-driven dart. Okay, usually compressed air. And if you look at the dart itself, you can see that it's made up of two slightly different sizes of probably polycarbonate plastic that's glued together, the front one of which is going to be the liquid drug chamber, and then the back one of which is going to be your air chamber or your compression chamber. So if you look at the liquid drug chamber, you'll see that there is a plunger at the bottom of it. It has the chamber that you're going to be injecting your immobilizing drug into. And then on the front of that is going to be a needle that fits onto the base of that syringe that has got, probably in this particular case, it's closed off at the front, and you have what's called little side ports, or little holes on the side, that if you slide a plastic sleeve over that, you actually close off then that front compartment. The back compartment is your air chamber, and that is really where you're going to pressurize your dart gun from. Now, what's important here is that plunger that you see there identified in black fits fairly tightly up against the sides of that barrel. So it acts like a typical needle and syringe basis in terms of that is your plunger that you're going to be injecting with. And then at the base of the dart on the right-hand side, just before the pink fluff or the stabilizer, there is a non-return valve. There is, in fact, a smaller plunger there that's often black or pink or red in color that is loosely fitting. So if you put pressure in the back of the dart, and we'll show you how it's done, the air pressure goes past the sides of that plunger, accumulates in your air chamber, and when you release the pressure, it closes back up against that shoulder and acts like a non-return valve and shuts off your valve there completely. Stabilizer is critically important in this. If you were to fire off a stabilizer, a dart without a stabilizer, I beg your pardon, that dart will just go around in circles and not be able to travel in any particular distance at all. The bottom diagram is a generic explosive charge-driven dart, and you can see that it's very, very different. It's usually got some sort of a liquid drug chamber, which it could be aluminium, it could be polycarbonate. You've got a needle in front. You've got a plunger there that's indicated. Just behind the plunger, there's a small explosive charge. Behind that is a little spring. And then right at the back, you'll see there's a little hammer which is fitted into what's called the stabilizer or the flight. And we'll show you how that works. But those are just the two different mechanisms. So the one is an air pressure compartment at the front that you actually create. The second one at the bottom is a preloaded dart ready for use. So if you have a look at the photograph on the left-hand side, bottom left, you can see at the top of that particular slide, there's a Daneject dart that works exactly the same way as the dart that we've seen up top. And then right at the bottom is what's called a new dart, and that was with the explosive charge already built in. The other two darts are similar. The one there with the yellow plastic tail is a spring-loaded dart that is not really made anymore, so we're not really going to discuss that in any more detail. So how do you, as a veterinarian or a game capture operator, decide which is the right kind of dart for you to use? And here you're going to be looking at a whole variety of things like needle choice, dart size, dart type. Are you going to be darting an elephant? Are you going to be darting a mandrill monkey or baboon? Are you going for an ostrich? So there are a whole variety of things that you need to take into account. There's also a whole variety of dart guns that you need to be looking at, and you can actually get very confused when trying to make a decision what is going to be the right kind of process and dart that you want to acquire for yourself. But fundamentally, you're going to be starting off with something like needle choice. What kind of animal am I going to be darting? What kind of needle am I going to be looking at? And here you can see a wide variety of needles. On the top left-hand slide, these are needles that fit onto the Daneject or the air pressure-powered guns. And you can't see very clearly, and we'll show you some of these a little bit later, but they're long, thin needles. Some of them are slightly thicker. They have little side holes on the side. And then you can also see that midway along their shaft, they've got a little collar or a little blob. And that is really just a barb or a collar. And the function of that is to, once the dart goes into the animal, is just to make sure that the dart stays in the animal. The same applies then to the needles in the right-hand side photograph. Again, different sizes, different kinds. And if you have a look at the new darts in the bottom slide, you can see that they've got long needles. Some of them are thick, some of them are thinner. Some of them have got a very thick bore. Some of them have got a thick width to the actual dart itself. And then this whole thing of porting, in other words, the hole. Is the hole on the front or is the hole on the side? If the holes are on the side, you don't get a plug of skin that goes into the lumen of the needle as it goes into the animal. And this is something that's called coring. So a lot of the older dart kinds have got a front porting system where it is possible that you can take a little plug of skin in with you that prevents the dart from going off. Some of the more sophisticated ones then have the porting on the side. Now, just to get back to the barb or the blob of gelatine or the collar, we want to make sure that the dart stays in the animal for two reasons. A, that you can probably identify which is the animal that you've actually darted. Secondly, that you can recover your dart. But most importantly is to make sure that when the dart goes off, that drug is actually gets injected directly into the animal. If you don't have a barb or a gelatin collar or a collar on there of some form, the dart will go in and bounce straight out. And as it bounces out, you'll see that the dart will go off and the drug will be injected onto the skin of the animal, and you will have wasted a lot of time and money. So that's the function of the barb. Like the flight, if you don't have it in certain instances, it's really critical. So let's have a look at the needle choice again. You can see in the top slide, there is a beveled needle. It's got a little blob of solder or collar in place. The needle at the bottom is non-beveled. In other words, it's closed in front. It's got two little side ports that you can see under that red collar, and that is where the drug is going to get injected through. So in the top needle, as the dart hits the animal, the dart will go off, and we'll explain to you in detail, and the whole drug will be injected into the animal. The bottom slide is that as the needle penetrates through the animal, the skin pushes that red collar back up all the way to the shoulder of the needle, opens up those two little side ports, and because it's under pressure, the drug gets injected. So on the left-hand slide, you can see just two little gelatin collars attached to, these are new darts, and the idea is that these can be used as vaccination darts, that the gelatin dissolves, and the darts fall out, and then you don't have to worry about recovering them. Obviously, if it's an immobilizing animal or immobilized animal, you want to be sure that you recover those darts. Right, dart size. What sort of dart size are you looking at? If you're looking at a small animal, you can get away with 1 cc. If it's a really concentrated solution, you can get away with 1 cc in an animal the size of an elephant. But it really depends on the combinations that you're going to be using. So you get a whole variety of different sizes, all the way from 1 up to 10 cc. Darts of different kinds and constructions. But what's important to remember is that the heavier your darts become, the more compromised you are going to be, A, in terms of velocity, and B, accuracy, and C, the amount of actual damage that you're going to be doing to that animal. The harder you shoot, the heavier the darts are, the further you've got to shoot, the higher the impact energy. And impact energy is defined in that formula, half mass times volume squared. And if you look at the masses of those particular darts below there, you can see that the Dan-inject, Tel-inject darts are by far the lightest darts around. So the amount of damage that they're actually going to be doing from impact energy alone is going to be minimal compared to something like a capture dart, which you can see is substantially higher at the bottom of that table. So the idea is to keep the dart weight as low as possible. There clearly are going to be other factors, which we'll touch on later, that actually plays a significant factor in terms of how much damage a dart does to an animal, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. So, dart types. You're going to be seeing a whole variety of dart types, different manufacturers. Many of them are compatible with different dart guns, so you'll be able to use a new dart in a Dan-inject gun You can use certain kinds of capture darts in new darts and Dan inject guns, and to some extent even other variations of that, teledart, etc. So there are a whole variety of combinations that if you know your system well enough, you can make a plan to get around and identify what you need. So let's look at the mechanism of how darts work of the two different systems that we've been speaking about. And we're going to start off with the compressed air one, and we're going to use Dan inject as an example, simply because they are the most commonly used around here at the moment, and to some extent they're slightly more robust than other things like Dan inject and dist inject. But you can see in the bottom slide, bottom photograph, is what the basic dart looks like, which is literally just that 2 cylinders of polycarbonate plastic that are fused together in the middle. On the left-hand side of the basic dart, you can see a black blob, which is going to be the plunger that's going to work as in a ordinary syringe. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the piece of cloth around the base of the dart, which just actually helps to seal it. But if you look carefully, just in front of that red tape, there is a little red plunger inside that back barrel. Okay, so when you look at the complete dart at the top, you can see there's your front compartment, which is going to hold your drug. There's a needle on front. It's got a collar on it. The back of the dart has got the flight on it, but you can see that red plunger is halfway down the barrel of that back compartment, your back pressurization compartment. So that tells me that if I'm looking at that particular dart, that there's probably likely to be some sort of fluid or drug inside the front compartment, but the back compartment has not been pressurized. So this is a big thing to know, is that these darts can go off sometimes spontaneously, and one needs to keep them as safe as possible. So all the other bits and bobs that go with this particular darting system, you can see that there is a 20 cc syringe. It's coupled to a connector that gets fitted to the back of the dart where your tailpiece fits on. You can see there are needles. Some of them have got a collar on, others are just straight. And depending on the size of the needle, it either comes with a little green sleeve or a red sleeve. The green sleeve takes the smaller needle, and the red sleeve are made for the thicker needles that you're going to be using. So let's have a look at these in more detail. So Dan injects are, beg your pardon, it's not made in the USA. They are made in Denmark. But you can in fact see what this dart looks like here as the way it's being held up. If we have a look at the basic foundation of the dart, you can see the front chamber that you're going to have for your drug injection solution. You're going to have the rear air chamber, which includes then your plunger that you're going to use for pressurization. You're going to have a tailpiece or flight just at the back, this little pink piece of fluff. On the front of the dart, you can see there that the needle has been screwed or turned into a conical shaped post with a lure lock support around it, so it just adds to stability. You can see that the needle has got a collar on it. You can see that the needle, if you look carefully, has got 2 little side ports, but you can clearly see that there is a red sleeve over that. Okay, and then right at the bottom, just up against the tailpiece, you can see the bit of the plunger sticking out of the back compartment, and we'll show you how that's loaded now. So again, Dan inject dart, you hold this is where you're actually going to be constructing it and filling it and putting your drugs in it. Hold the dart upside down. You use your 20 cc syringe with a connector, fits on the front of that particular syringe. You push that front plunger back, as in diagram number A. In diagram number B, that syringe is now turned around. You put your plunger and connector to one side, you take your drug, and you inject it into that front compartment, as in slide number B. Slide number C, put the needle into that lure lock position at the front of the dart. And then if you have a look at slide number D, you can see that that needle gets tightened on to the top of that dart with something like a Leatherman, or manufacturers recommend that you do it just by finger pressure only, but most people just use a Leatherman. And then if you have a look in detail at the 2-star little picture, you can see that there is a red sleeve that's going onto the front of that needle that's going to cover those 2 side ports that are built into 2 little side holes that are built into the side of that needle. So if you have a look at slide E, you can see that you effectively now have got half the dart made up with the front compartment now completely sealed. Plunger at the bottom, needles in place, the collars over those 2 little side holes, and that compartment is now sealed. So the thing to do now is to go ahead and pressurize that dart, and this is shown in point F. Normally you have a sleeve that goes right over the front of that needle as a safety sleeve, but it's just been left off from the point of view of the photograph. So you use compressed air that goes into the back of the syringe like that. Manufacturers usually recommend something like 13 cc's for a 3 cc dart, and you push it in slowly until you actually see that front plunger either move or distort a little bit in shape. And when you release that needle, the syringe and the connector at the back, quickly you can hear a slight release of pressure. If you test it a bit with a slight with a stiffened rod, you can actually feel that there is resistance. So when you put the flight onto that particular dart, you now have a dart that is ready to be used. It's got the front compartment, it's got the back compartment, it's got a flight, it's got a needle, it's ready to be shot off into an animal and for the dart actually to take effect. All right, let's have a look at these darts in slightly more detail. They are multi-use, so once you've used it, you can take them apart, you can clean them again, you can reuse the components. Sometimes the components are quite easy to replace. Sometimes you don't have an option, as you'll see later, with disadvantages that they're no longer so good. They're fairly lightweight. You can use them on a wide variety of species, from a darting elephant out of a helicopter to darting dogs in a cage, or gorillas in a cage at really short distance. You can use them on a whole variety of species. And that is probably their biggest advantage, is that you can use them on a wide variety of species. The other nice thing about them is that their impact energy is fairly low. If you remember in that table where we showed you the weights of the particular darts, the Dan inject or the Tel inject darts were the lowest of the whole lot. So the damage that is done to the tissues of an animal is actually minor. So the fact that it's got little side ports on the side of the needles means that you have very little blockage of the needle as the dart goes into the animal, and very little stopping of the dart actually injecting the dose of the drug that you want to into that particular animal. What's also useful is that because it's got a pink flight attached to it, the dart is still stuck in the animal. You can actually see quite easily which animals you have done if you're in a group, and then you can and go ahead and dart another one. The fact that it's clear plastic is also really nice, that you can see when the dart has actually gone off. When that plunger is pushed right down to the front of the front compartment, then your drug has injected. And you know that you have got a pretty good chance that within a minute or two, or however long it's going to take, depending on the combination that you've used, that your dart is actually going to go off, and if it has gone off, and that you're going to have success with the animal that you're about to anesthetize. They have disadvantages. They're plastic, so they're fairly easily damaged. There are quite a number of little bits and pieces that you've got to assemble. If you actually just look at the darts themselves, there are about 4 bits and pieces that you've got to add together. as well as having 4 ancillary bits of pieces of kit, like a syringe, the connector, the sleeve, etc., for making sure that you can do this safely. Sometimes, because they are reusable, if you use them too often and you shoot them too hard, the darts can bend, and you get collapse of the back compartment segment all the way into the front. Sometimes this pink pressurization plunger goes right all the way through and sits in the front compartment, and you can do nothing about it. Sometimes the darts only partially discharge, which is really a nuisance, particularly if you're reusing them. So you can see that the plunger has only gone off halfway, and you must expect that you're going to have a partial dose of the drug given to the animal, and you have to make a decision from there. Do I give more, or must I just wait and see? The flights can become damaged, and if they fall off, the dart becomes unstable in flight, as we said earlier. The darts are really only accurate at a relatively short distance, 30 to 40 meters maximum, and then they're quite easily influenced by wind, and particularly by little bits of vegetation. Grass stalk or a twig or something can really put it off its course, and actually can end up going miles from where you want it to do. As the dart hits, the dart hangs there. Sometimes that little piece of pink fluff actually seems to act as a source of irritation for the animals, and they actually turn around and they look at it with some degree of curiosity, and they try and bite at it to try and find out what it is and try and get rid of it. They're also reasonably expensive in terms of what their cost is. The fact that they're reusable is quite nice, but I found in practice that you can only really reuse these darts up to 4 times before you start having problems. I think the current price of these darts is probably in the region of about 300, 350 Rand. So it does add up substantially when you're doing a lot of animals, but if you can reuse them, it does make a difference. So we have a whole lot of other kinds of darts, which I'm not really going to discuss now. Some are spring-loaded, as you saw, which are quite difficult to handle. They're extremely accurate and very nice to use, but they're not manufactured anymore. Very lightweight dart, but have hugely high impact energies. Others that were made by the Kruger National Park, which were a combination of acetic acid and bicarbonate mixtures in the back of the dart, so that you had a slow injection, a slow release, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other one was a Paxarms, which was the New Zealand dart gun, which is air pressure loaded. So you actually didn't need to pressurize the gun. As you shot the dart out of the gun itself, the air pressure that pushed the dart forward was enough to pressurize the dart as it went out down the barrel of the gun. An unusual darting system, not that I've seen for many years, and I don't know that it's available. All right, so let's have a look at dart guns themselves. Again, as we said earlier, we have a whole variety of different types of guns that are either air-based, and we're going to see the other form a little bit later, which is powder-charged based. But we're going to start off with the air pressure-based guns. The most commonly used ones that are available nowadays, certainly of the newer versions, are probably the gun that's in the center of the 3 slides, and that is the new dart gun, which is an air pressure based gun but shoots a powder charged dart. There are teledarts, which is the bottom of those 3 photographs, and then the top of those 3 photographs is actually also an old air pressure gun, a capture gun that was powered by CO2 powlets in the gun, and you could actually shoot aluminium darts from that. So there's a huge variety of mixing and matching that happens with systems of propulsion and the kind of darts that are used. And you'll have to decide which one suits you best. Right, let's have a look at some of these again. We're going to start with the Daneject system again. And you can see immediately, if you look at the top and the middle 2 photographs. In the top photograph, you have what is called a Daneject JM Special, with a short little barrel, which is great for boma work or helicopter darting. And the next slide below that, you have a much, much longer barrel, which can either be an 11 millimeter barrel, which is standardly used for the Danijek type darts or the plastic darts, or there's also a 13 millimeter barrel available that can take some of the slightly heavier caliber, thicker caliber, new dart, Danijek, new dart and capture darts in that, and they work equally well. There are two different models of this JM2 available. One is called a standard, and there the amount of pressure that you can dial up. If you have a look at the bottom right little photograph there's a pressure gauge. The standard dials up to 16 bar. The JM2 Special dials up to 25 bar. You have a little CO2 power adjuster that you can gauge the amount of pressure that you need to put into the cylinder to be able to fire and power your dart. And there's a formula that's calculated or given to you that usually about every 2 meters of distance that you want to be shooting, you're going to be putting in 2 or 3 bars. And there's a variation of that in terms of different dart systems, but that is explained to you when you actually get the system. Obviously, you don't want to put 20 bars into the firing cylinder if your animal's only going to be 1 or 2 meters away. So you have the ability to adjust the amount of pressure that you're going to be powering the dart with. So there's in the center photograph, there's your CO2 power adjuster. And then in the left-hand photograph, you have different kinds of CO2 cylinders that you can attach, which will give you a number of different charges depending on the size of how you're going to be shooting with it. We're going to be talking about sights a little bit later, so we're not going to talk about them now. But this is probably one of the most common dart guns available, certainly for those guys that want to use the air-powered or the air-driven lightweight plastic darts like Danijek. The JM2 Standard or Special is one of the most common ones around. So, what's nice about this gun? It's versatile, as with the darts. It can be used from the ground. It can be used from a helicopter. It can be used on a fairly wide range of animals. But just one thing that I haven't got on the slide is that you can use it from a helicopter, but you need to be careful where you're actually darting, at what distance you're darting from, because it can be very influenced by the downwash from the rotor blades of the helicopter. So that is something that you need to bear in mind. It is nice that you can adjust the amount of pressure that you put into the gun so that you can dart at different distances. And you can, if the animal's coming closer, you just scale it down, put less pressure into the pressurization compartment from your CO2 cartridge, and then you can actually have a fairly atraumatic shot. The one thing that's important about gas-powered guns compared to any of the powder charge powered guns is that you have a consistency of pressure to distance ratio. In other words, 5 bars is 5 bars. 5 bars is going to give you a consistent amount of distance for a dart of exactly the same size, which does not always apply in the powder charge gun scenarios. So fantastic about all gas-powered guns. 5 bars or any kind of consistent pressurization makes a difference to where you want to go. Again, as we said, you get 11 and 13 millimeter barrels, can take new darts or capture darts, and I know a lot of colleagues actually do that. Some of the disadvantages of the gun, the gauge on the side tends to sometimes get bumped, get in the way, so you just have to be careful how you're handling it. This little, in the right-hand slide, you can see a little furling knob, which is really your securing probe that pushes the gun in. It's got a little screw thread on it, and this is probably the most significant disadvantage to this gun is that you can cross-thread that little screw-in probe very easily, or if you're darting from a helicopter, if you drop that probe and you haven't got a duplicate, it's gone. You can't shoot anything. What's also important is that because it's air pressure, it's got O-rings in it, it's got seals that need to be checked on a regular basis, and it's also fairly expensive. But then probably some of the other more sophisticated powder charge guns are also equally expensive. Let's look at some of the others. Some of you guys in other parts of the world might also might have these available. The Teledart comes in various shapes and sizes. Principles are pretty much the same as the Daninject. I haven't seen any of them available here, but they certainly are available in Europe and the US and other parts of the world. An older system called Telinject, which started way before Daninject did. The variety of variants of the Telinject, and probably their best known one was something called a GUT-50, which is certainly one of the stable guns that I had in practice for being able to handle animals within a BOMA situation. What other darts have we got available? Pistols, handheld pistols. We've seen the Teledart pistol from the other slide as well, and this is just what the back end looks like. This has particularly got a gauge, which is quite nice, so you can scale the pressure up to a certain distance, and then you can really just hold the dart out in front of you in a pistol format in the same way that you would, and then just shoot. The Daninject one is a lot more basic. It's just got a CO2 cylinder. It's got a little pressurization compartment. It's got a basic trigger. It doesn't have you actually dismantle the gun. You put that dart into the barrel, push it down the barrel, and stick the barrel actually onto that little handheld pistol grip again. There's no sight. There's no safety. You just hold the gun probably with two hands, pressurize it up to a certain distance, and then you just aim along the length of the barrel. Pretty basic, but it certainly does work. Okay. Right, let's have a look at the last different kind of dart that we have available, and that is what's called the powder charge guns, or those that have an internal charge. And the first gun that was developed that had this system was the capture gun, developed and also known as the Palmer system. And you can see in the left-hand photograph that there are a whole variety of different needle types, short little needles on the right-hand side going all the way across to really robust rhino needles in the extreme left-hand needle there. It's got a collar on it. You can see at the front of the needle, it's closed off in the front and a conical point, but it's got a little side port. Some of the other needles there don't have side ports. They have got a front bevel and then a port through which the drug is actually injected. So the dart basically consisted of a little aluminium casing with a screw thread or aluminium barrel with a screw thread on either end. The front end you put your needle onto, and then the back end that you put the flight onto, and in the middle is going to be your plunger and the internal charge, and we'll show you in the next couple of slides how that assembles. And then on the right hand of that photograph there, you can see the capture dart gun with a different tail attached now, and then just a much longer needle attached to the front, which will probably be more adequate for rhino work. Again, capture dart. You can see if you have a look at the top slide, aluminium syringe case, aluminium dart case, screw thread on either end. The left-hand side, it's got the needle, which is beveled. It's got a little collar on it. It's got an O-ring which acts to help seal the needle when you screw it in. It's got a rubber plunger that fits into the barrel of the syringe. You've got an internal charge that gets fitted into that, and onto the back of that you have a tailpiece. And this particular one is called a Simmons tailpiece. It's just a plastic one, and then in the bottom photograph it's all screwed together, and you can see it ready for action. So how does this all fit together, and how does this work? There's on the left-hand side, you can see a photograph of the needle with an O-ring, a screw thread attached. In photograph number A, you can see that there is a plunger, which is just really some sort of polyurethane rubber. It's got little ridges on it, which enables it to stick quite well to the sides of the dart barrel. It's got a hole actually in, or a depression actually in the plunger, that you then push the charge into. So if you have a look at the diagram below number A, you can see there's what the little powder charge looks like. First of all, on the right-hand side of that little powder charge, you can see there is a blob of gunpowder or powder charge. It's suspended by a fairly, or rather, in front of it is a fairly low density, fairly weak spring, and then on top of that, there is a triangular piece of metal, which is really a counterweight. And then on the front of that is the flat end, which is a movable plate. So when you insert the charge into the plunger, as in the right-hand diagram there, and if you have a look in photograph B, you have to push the round end of that charge into the bottom of the plunger. So what happens is that as you push that, if you look in point C, as you push that whole plunger and internal charge assembly into the barrel of the dart gun, it closes it up, and that becomes your pressurization compartment in exactly the same way as the new dart did when we spoke about that earlier, which is the preloaded one. This is just doing it manually. But you have to be careful that this gets done in the right way. If you change the direction in which you put that charge into that plunger, and you to put the round end outside and the flat end inside, you're going to end up with a problem. What happens is when the dart hits the animal, and if it's assembled the right way, as the dart hits the animal, the dart stops, and the velocity that the dart is traveling with and momentum, it just pushes that little triangular charge forward, compresses that weak spring. The front of that triangular piece of metal impacts on the gunpowder in front, and that little explosive charge goes off inside the dart and then pressures the plunger forward and then injects the drug into the animal. So let's have a look at probably the oldest system, as we said, was the capture system. This particular one, you can see a whole variety of different needle lengths, a whole variety of different dart sizes. The charges are there, and you can also see in the plastic containers at the back of it that there are a different variety of dart that's been made, probably similar to the old Paxarm system, where you just load your drugs into the front, you put them into the dart gun, and you shoot. And then as the dart travels down the barrel of the gun, the pressure from the actual dart that's propelling it, or the charge that's propelling it, actually just fills, or rather pressurizes the dart as it actually goes down the barrel of the dart. So when one looks at the front of the when one looks at the front of the or rather the inside of the actual dart, it comes in different kinds of charges, depending on the size of dart that you're going to be using. You can see this particular charge is made for 1 cc through to 3 cc's in size. You get different strengths that are made up for 5 cc's in charge, and they are you just have to make sure that you use exactly the same or applicable kind of charge for the dart that you're going to be using. You'll also have noticed by now that there are lots of fiddly bits that you've got to assemble. You've got to assemble it in the right way. There are 5 parts to assemble. You can damage the screw threads of the darts and the needles. The darts can swell. Sometimes they don't fit into the barrels, and particularly if you're reusing them a lot of times. You need adequate lubrication of that plunger inside the dart barrel, of the dart tube. Otherwise, it doesn't go down. Sometimes these internal charges get wet and they don't go off. So even although you might have a perfect shot, because it's got gunpowder inside, the darts just don't go off. And most importantly, your internal charges sometimes are not always the same strength. Okay, and that applies also to the actual charges that drive the darts themselves. Both sometimes are not of equal strength. So let's have a look at the dart guns themselves. Powder-charged dart guns, the ones that we have in Southern Africa at the moment, are mainly capture and new dart. There are still some Pax Arms guns available. We don't have a photograph of those two. Those ones up top there are really just primarily the capture and the new dart guns. So let's have a look at these again in slightly more detail. Again, as we said with earlier discussion, is that manufacturers play around with different kinds of systems that they want to use and how they're going to be doing it. In the left-hand photograph, there is a capture gun which uses the aluminium then darts, but it's actually a CO2 propelled rifle. In the bottom right-hand photograph is what's called the extra long-range projector. Again, you have darts that get fitted in. It's got a little adapter at the back that pushes the dart in, and you've got a whole variety of charges that are then used to propel those darts for any particular distance. And the charges are graded from brown, green, yellow, and sometimes up to red, although the red charges are very seldom available anymore. So what are the advantages of the capture guns? They're fairly well made, they're robust, they're a fairly well balanced rifle. They're actually just a modified .50 caliber shotgun. Some of the later versions have actually got rifled barrels, others don't. Rifling obviously just gives you a spin on the dart that to some extent improves accuracy. And most of them were supplied with an open V sight, but obviously some people have then gone ahead and modified them with a telescope or something like a red dot scope. Okay, you have a limited ability to vary the force of propulsion with any powder charge system. You have the different strengths of guns, but the actual impact that the dart itself can do is actually quite severe, and they're best suited to large species. And typically, being powder charge guns, they tend to develop gunpowder residue actually in the guns, and they need to be cleaned on a regular basis. So one of the big disadvantages to any kind of powder charge gun and also powder charged darts is that the explosive charge that is built into the dart itself can actually do significant amounts of muscle damage on its own, irrespective of how hard the dart actually hits. Compare that to something like a Dun-Inject dart. So let's have a look at the new dart systems. Exactly the same principle as a capture system. This is an old dart, an old photograph, again with an aluminium syringe barrel. You have your long needle, it's got a gelatin barb, it's got a front port or front opening, it's beveled. This particular one has got a little piece of wire which really acts as a safety that you had to take it out before you actually shot, but it's no longer made like that. But that's really how they initially came out. And nowadays when you see new darts, they look something like this. They've either got a C-type, which is in the top right-hand side, which fits quite nicely in a rifled barrel. Again, the thing about filling any kinds of pre-filled or pre-made darts like a new dart is that you must be able to have a long needle that goes down the lumen of the front needle and injects the drug into the drug compartment in front. The P-type is also made for a powder charge system. The U-type are those that are flexible between something like a DAN inject, which is an air-powered system, and then the two darts on the bottom right-hand side are different kinds of polycarbonate darts, half cc or 1 cc darts, and they're actually very nice and very useful to use. So what are some of the advantages of new darts? They're lightweight, they're very accurate, they're fairly versatile with regard to species, from large to small species. They're fairly accurate over long range. What is nice about them is that they're pre-assembled. So all that you just have to do is inject your drug into the front of the compartment. They're single use, so when you've done with them, you dispose of them, you throw them away, and you start for the next time you use with a new dart, a brand new one. And they are really very, very easy to use. You get multiple dart sizes, and you get multiple dart lengths. So a very, very versatile system, and that can be fired from a number of dart guns, which is actually very nice to have and very nice to use. Disadvantages, as you've said with some of the capture systems, the internal charge actually in the dart gets damp, and particularly if you're using it in fairly humid kind of climates. There have been reports where darts have been fired reasonably into targets or animals, and then the darts just simply don't go off. The other thing to remember is they are fairly lightweight if you go back to that table that we spoke about, but because they fly so fast, they end up having a fairly high impact energy. And if you're going to be darting animals like zebra at fairly long range and you're aiming for the hindquarters or the rump, these new darts will bury themselves in the muscles of a zebra that you just see the orange plastic tips sticking out of the muscle. So you have to select your site that you're darting particular species, either the shoulders or the neck, or scale your velocity down, and that can make a big difference in terms of what the amount of damage is that you can do. If your needles are slightly bent, the dart is going to go off completely haywire distance and will not fly true. The older needles, particularly those with bevels in front, you can get coring and then you hit nicely, but the dart doesn't go off. And to some extent, only having a single use is a disadvantage, is that it just probably costs you a little bit more, but probably in the long run, it might be worth it. And then fundamentally, as we said, that you must have a longer needle or spinal other than the length of the actual dart needle to fill up these particular darts. Otherwise, you're going to just end up filling the lumen of the needle of the dart rather than actually putting the immobilizing drug into the dart compartment or chamber. So, new dart guns come in two formats. One is the carbon dioxide propelled G2 Excalibur, and the other one is a powder charge. And we're going to see how these work now. So the Excalibur gun is fairly newish, but has become a favorite amongst many people in South Africa and Southern Africa for use. If you have a look at the slide in the middle, the bottom, you can see that it's got a little pressurization guide on the side. And then directly below that is a place where your CO2 cylinder is going to be screwed into place. So there again, you have a simple cylinder that's screwed into place. You have a gauge, which we'll show you just now, which you can take gas out of that cylinder into your combustion or compression chamber that's going to propel your dart. You have a double safety system on the safety pin here. On the safety tab, you've got a fire setting, you've got a safe setting, and then you've got a super safe setting on the right-hand photograph. Top photograph, you can see that it's got a really interesting way that to actually load the dart into the barrel. You pull the back of the butt or the stock backwards, and you turn it, and then it opens up a little horizontal channel in the stock that then allows you to feed that dart past the stock and through into the compression chamber of the dart gun. And that actually works very, very easily and very well. And then sometimes they come, and then obviously once you put the dart into the barrel, you just pull that little stock backwards, and then you close it up, and then you're ready to fire. I've seen a colleague dart 6 or 7 blesbok using one of these dart guns at 15 seconds a blesbok. So in terms of loading and darting, so it's a very, very easy and versatile and repeatable system to be able to use. All right, the advantages of this particular gun: it's robust, it's very accurate up to long range. Some people have bought very, very expensive sighting systems, and they claim to be able to shoot accurately over distances of anything up to 80 meters, which is substantial. Most darting distances are probably accurate at around about 30 to 40 meters. Thereafter, it's becoming a little bit of an uncertainty whether you're going to hit them or not. But with higher quality sights, you can certainly get substantially more than that. It's an advantage of that rapid loading mechanism, as I said. Constant pressurization in relation to distance. Again, with the Daninject dart gun, 5 bars is 5 bars. 5 bars is going to give you 5 bars worth of distance, which you're not going to get easily from the a powder charge system. At the bottom of the bottom right-hand slide, you can see that there is a canister in front of the trigger guard, which is essentially pretty much a paintball type canister, which you can have refilled, and you can just really screw onto the front of it. How do you adjust the pressure on this gun? If you look directly in front of that canister and directly below the front of the telescopic sight, there is a round-filled knob that you turn from side to side that allows you to put pressure into the compressurization compartment, and then you see from there what you're going to be doing. It looks to me, if you look at the bottom right photograph, that not only is there a telescopic sight fitted to this particular gun, but just below that, it looks like that there is actually a red dot laser finder fitted to this particular gun also, which is really going to improve your accuracy. All right, disadvantages of this Excalibur. Very few. I think the biggest thing potentially possible is that this damage to the locking mechanism can certainly happen. The system, if you're trying to do it too quickly and you're not being consistent enough, it's got a little latch that has to catch to hold things in place, and you can actually just bend the bar and just twist that out of alignment quite easily, and that's probably one of the few disadvantages to it. And it's fairly expensive also. Right, let's go on to the last of the powder charge systems that we've got, which is the 389, Daninject 389. It's a powder charge propelled. It's breech loading, as you will see later on. It usually comes with a magazine with that you can put in different strength of charges. It's also got a porting system, which is quite interesting as an ability to vary pressure that you're going to use to dart an animal with. And there are 3 models that are around, from new to old, and each have got a slightly different porting mechanism, which we'll show you how that works. And then some people have fitted a telescopic or red dot sight. So these are the 3 boxes of charges that you see there. You can see that bottom left is brown, which is the weaker one. Then it goes up to 3, which is slightly stronger, and then yellow, which is a stronger version of the 3 that you have here. There used to be a red charge available too, but those are no longer made. So let's have a look at the 389. This is an older version. You can see, obviously, just if we start with the whole dart gun, it's very much built around what an existing dart gun looks like. It's got an extra tube on it. If you have a look at the back of the gun to where it's being held by the darter, you can see that it's got a safety, which is not visible here. It's got a rifle bolt action, which typically loads the charge that comes from the magazine into the breech. And if you have a look at the front of the gun, just in front of the hand of the guy who's holding the gun, you can see that there is an adjustable porting system. So on the outside of this particular gun, you can not only can you vary the charge that you're putting into the magazine from a brown to a yellow, but you can also vary the amount of gas that you're going to vent off by using this adjustable porting in the front of the gun. So you can scale the pressure up and down depending on how much impact you want to have behind that particular gun. So if you have a look at photograph A, you can see the magazine is being loaded there. It slots into the bottom of the gun there in place. This particular old version has got a little lever action that you slide the dart into the front of the barrel. It then clips in behind it and you lock it in place, and then it's ready to shoot from there. Some of the newer guns that you get nowadays of the 389, again powder charge propelled. This particular one's got a barrel brake, and you can actually see the dart in the bottom left hand photograph. You can actually see the dart being loaded into that barrel, so that barrel just clips down back into place. In the top right hand photograph, you can see that they're just below the sight, which is actually very nice. You've got a porting system right there that you can decide what is the amount of pressure that you're going to use for this particular instance in combination with the charge that you've got. So this is probably the most recent variation of the 389, certainly that I've seen. So advantages to it. It's fairly robust. This barrel brake mechanism on the recent 389 is very nice to use. It's quick and easy to load. A magazine will allow you multiple rapid shots. You've got 6 cartridges or 6 powder charges in there, and you can certainly get off a number of shots in that. You obviously have to load a dart in every time to be able to use it, but it certainly does make life easier. You have got a porting system that allows you to modify the impact that you're going to be pushing behind the dart, and you can select then for multiple distances and probably also for multiple weights of darts that you want to actually use. This is photographs of the older versions of the 389. Again, as we've said with previously, the new darts have high impact energy. They fly very fast. The tissue damage on their own is very substantial. But because they've got this internal charge, that internal charge going off on impact actually can do a lot of tissue damage on its own. The fact that you've got 3 charges and sometimes 4, 5, sometimes 6, and up to 7 different kinds of settings means that you have 21 different settings on the gun to be able to juggle what kind of darting distance you're going to be working on. And it becomes quite a nightmare to be able to then work on what setting you're going to be using. So most people tend to standardize on one particular charge, and they vary the porting on the gun depending on what they want to use and what they want to shoot. The charges can jam in the breech if you're trying to eject them or to put it in. Sometimes they jam, and it's quite a pain to get them out. The darts themselves can jam in the barrel, and as with any powder charge system, they can jam. So these 2 photographs that we've got here, the one is a copy of the first gun that we showed you, where we have got a porting system in front of the actual compression compartment. The one at the top is where there is actually just a variation in the porting ability, in the locking mechanism that pushes the dart into the barrel. And then that is just above the actual breech and magazine compartment of the gun. Right, last of the darting systems that we've got available in South Africa are Matsumi darts, which are locally made. They also, like New Dart, exactly the same kind of principle. They're pre-assembled with an internal charge, and some now come with a variety of screw-in needles, so it's not necessarily that you have a standard needle and dart available to you. And some of the newer manufactured darts actually are completely aluminium made, solid aluminium, with then screw-in needles that come into the front of that, and they can come in from shorter needles, anything up to rhino needles. And these have only been around for about the last 2 or 3 years, and they seem to be very popular and work extremely well. Made darts. Again, similar to New Dart, a new concept that they've brought out so that their darts can be used through a compressed air driven gun is to put little tail flights onto the darts, and you can see these two here, the red aluminium one, a red Stinger, and then a standard Matsumi dart in the background, both with little white tail flights. And the disadvantages to not necessarily these ones with the tail flights, but the disadvantages to the powder charged Matsumi darts are exactly the same as for New Darts in terms of powder getting wet, etc., etc. What does the gun look like? The gun is sold as a Sana or Sana. It's an inline loading. You twist the front of the barrel to the sideways and then up. So you twist it 90 degrees and you lift it up and you slot the dart in there. Again, it's got a magazine. You've got a pressure setting on the side of the gun, which gives you 6 different porting systems that you can use, and it's now only recently available, and we don't have much information on it yet, but certainly likely to be fairly popular. Right, let's just finish off our discussion with a discussion on sights, and you guys are probably familiar with these. The older guns simply just came out with a simple V-notch and then a blob sometimes on the front of the gun or a front sight, and you simply just aligned your V-notch and the front sight onto the target, and then that was the only ability that you had to aim. And a significant number of people actually still use or used these systems and were fairly accurate with them, up to 50, 60 meters. So it really is a question of how well you know your system. So those are the old kind of sights, and they've been largely replaced by a standard telescopic sight, as you can see in this particular one, in which you have crosshairs that you align on your target, and then you've obviously, and then you decide when its time is ready, and then you shoot. The last kind of sight that's available which is called a red dot sight. It's got a little battery inside it that will give you a floating dot, either red or green, and you align that dot on the target that you want to see. You have to keep both eyes open, and you align the dot on the target, and then you shoot. Okay. I think probably just really to conclude is that there are a whole variety of darting systems that are out there that you must decide what you want to use. Most people tend to have 2 darting systems. Many have only just one. I tended to use 2. I had a Daneject and an old capture dart gun. Other people use a Daneject system, either a JM2 that they use for Daneject darts, or they add in new darts. Other people just use 389s or any other kind of Excalibur dart if they need to. So you can use one system or you can use 2. It really depends on what your needs are. But probably the most important thing is that before you go out doing any kind of darting is that you must be able to estimate distance, either by eye, and it's useful just to pace out a set distance and see how far you're out, because that's going to determine what the settings are that you're going to use to drive your darts, either by eye, or if you're lucky enough to have a rangefinder or someone with you, they can call out the range to you and you can calibrate that directly into your dart gun just to improve your accuracy. And there is no question that practice is the only thing that's really going to make you consistent with, in terms of any kind of darting work. You could be a superb anaesthetist, you could know your drugs extremely well, and you could know their responses very well. You could understand how animal physiology works, but if you can't hit the animal to begin with, then that is a fundamental issue. And here's the colleague that I spoke of earlier, shooting a whole group of blessbuck at 15-second intervals using that Excalibur. I thank you very much. Any questions?
Hi, Richard. Hi, Richard. Can you hear me? Richard, can you hear me?
Hello, Liesel.
Hi. So, see, we had a bit of a chat while the talk was ongoing. So let me just see if there's anything we missed before, because I think I wrote out quite a few of my own questions. But thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk and incredibly informative. But I think if you didn't know anything about remote darting systems beforehand, you definitely know a lot right now. So I think I see you and Adrian were having a bit of a chat about darts actually going off mid-air. And why that would happen. And then Adrian also had a follow-up question about whether it's possible to have two darts used in one barrel at the same time.
Adrian, yes, it certainly is, but then it's a mistake on your part that you have loaded two darts into the same barrel. It's something that you have to do and you have to check in advance. And having said that, it happens to many people. It's happened to me before, where I pull the trigger and two dots have shot out the barrel. Elementary operator error. Yes.
Thanks. And then just to, Stephen, answer your question, we are recording the session. So, yes, we will send the link to view the recorded session afterwards. Richard, then Riza had a question. Is there a calculated formula to determine the appropriate projector pressure when using a CO-type projector?
It depends on which kind of dart gun or projector you're talking about. The old capture dart guns, there was no specific formula given in terms of what your settings needed to be in relation to distance. The new CO2 projectors like the Daneject, the new Dart Excalibur, there are set tables, calculated tables that are supplied and that are available on the internet that you can consult for working out how much pressure you need to actually put into the pressurization compartment to propel your dart a specific and a set distance. So yes, they are available. Thanks, Nadia.
Okay. Richard, I've lost you at the end, but I think it might be my signal. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Did anyone not hear me?
Okay, perfect. No, I'm suspecting it's on my end. I see we did have some queries about courses that are available from Roberto. If there's any, let me see if it is, no, not Roberto, sorry, Dr. Chandon, if there's any practical courses that are available for veterinarians to educate them more on the practical aspects of darting.
Yes, there certainly are. I suggested that there are certainly the courses that are offered by wildlife vets, by Dr. Kobus Raat, amongst other things, which you can possibly facilitate with Liesel. There are also other varieties of immobilization and wildlife courses that are offered by veterinarians in South Africa that are available on the internet and also certainly in Zimbabwe. So there are a number of courses out there that give people who've never done any darting before a good foundation in terms of what the dart projectors are, what the species requirements are, and really how to go about making a really professional job of doing what you need to do to provide a clinical service.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, Roberta, I know, Dr. Shandon, I know with COVID times it's very difficult for people to travel and it has limited the availability of these courses. But I think if you are interested, reach out to us at Wildlife Pharmaceuticals through our website or through our social media, and we'll be able to just give you some more information of what courses are available out there. Okay, Richard, to get back to the talk, sorry, Roberto, you had a question about, actually you've heard about this and know a little bit about it as well, is there was technology that came out of the States known as the BioBullet, which is essentially a dry drug form that you could use in a darting system. Have you had any experience with this kind of drug or this application?
Roberto, Liesel, can you hear me? No, okay.
Yes.
I've had no experience with it at all. It was proposed, if I can remember, 15 or 20 years ago for the first time. The problem, and it would be a wonderful technology, the problem is that it's fairly small and that you're limited by whatever drug you actually put into that BioBullet formulation. And often one plays around, depending on the species and the size of the animal, you play around with different drug combinations, you play around with different concentrations, you play around with different volumes. And if you've got something that's already in a BioBullet or a freeze-dried bullet, it just really limits your opportunities to be able to anesthetize that animal adequately. If it's something like a vaccine, it is much, much more applicable because we know if we're vaccinating an animal against rabies, effectively 1 ml of a rabies vaccine is good enough for most species from small to large. So it's not a technology that has developed any further than being a really nice idea and concept as far as I'm aware of.
Great, thanks, Richard. Then I had a couple of questions from my side. Now, you've had experience both in a zoo setting and then obviously in a free-range wildlife setting. What are the systems that you would recommend for either? What's the system you'd recommend for a zoo setting, for a zoo veterinarian, or what's the system you would recommend for someone predominantly working in a free-range setting?
Okay, I think there's probably multiple answers to this. And it is always really dependent on individual preference. But if you're working in a zoo, you're working with animals that are fairly small. You're darting small monkeys, you're darting small carnivores, you're darting anything up to elephants. And when you're talking about a zoo situation, from my point of view, there's nothing any better that I know of than something like a Dan-inject dart. Okay, and there are a variety of dart projectors, etc., can deliver a Dan-inject dart, either a tel-inject gun or tel-inject gun, the Dan-inject dart system itself, or even a teledart will do the same. They're just really robust, extremely well-made darts, extremely versatile, very low impact energy, and they certainly make sense from a zoo situation as far as I'm concerned. From a wildlife, for a free-ranging situation, my preference would be to go for something like a new dart, or possibly a Matsumi dart, which is a new development that's come out. So you have those two. And in practice, I used to use largely a Dan-inject dart, and then I used to play around with capture and new darts, but probably in the long run, with ease of usage, a new dart just really makes a lot of sense.
And then, if someone's starting out doing darting, what in your experience is the most cost-effective darting system if you were starting out?
I think if you're starting out, you need to try and look for a second-hand gun to begin with. There is certainly in South Africa, there's no point in spending 25 to 35,000 rand on a Excalibur gun or a Daninjek JM2 Special or something like that. Go and look for an old second-hand gun, what you can get, and you can play around. And some of the dart guns, you can change barrels from 11 to a 13 millimeter barrel. So you can change from a plastic Daninjek gun to something like a new dart with a 13 millimeter barrel. Most of these guns have got that sort of exchangeability. And there are so many second-hand dart guns available in Southern Africa and probably elsewhere in the world. You can play around and see what you can get.
Great, thanks. And then you spoke about the advantages and the disadvantages of the different systems, but considering that there's very potent and often highly concentrated medicines that are put into these darts, what are some of the human safety aspects that you need to take into consideration when it comes to these darting systems?
I think the most important thing to realize, exactly as you said, is firearm or rifle range safety is absolutely paramount. You can, for example, by accident, shoot someone with a bullet in the little toe, and they'll be extremely angry with you, and they'll have lots of damage to their toe, but they will recover. If you shoot someone with a dart that's got a highly potent opioid into their foot or their toe, they're likely to die. So the fundamental point about firearm safety is critical, and that applies whether you've got a dart gun or whether you've got a rifle or a pistol. And it's even more so when you're handling a dart gun.
Great. And then I saw you commented on the photo of the Silka. I think we've all had some great fun watching our colleague Dr. Silka fits a dart bless back in a boma. She makes it look like shooting fish in a barrel. But in those changes, we've also all had experiences with darts not discharging. So what are some of the reasons that these darts don't discharge? When you get to the animal doesn't go down, or you see it's only slightly affected, so you know it's not completely got the full dose. What are some of the reasons for that happening?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. A, that the dart itself hasn't gone off. And you can see that if it's a clear plastic dart, you can see that the plunger hasn't been pushed forward and the drug has not been injected. If it's an aluminium barrel dart, you can't actually see that. So you have to assume that the drug has been discharged. And sometimes you can actually hear that internal charge going off. So you've got a good idea that the charge may have worked or may not have worked. So you've got a couple of things to think of. Either the dart has been embedded in tissue or connective tissue or bone where it's not been adequately absorbed from the injection site, or possibly that there's something wrong with the dart and it hasn't gone off. Now, there are basically effectively two different systems of working out dart composition in terms of dosage. In years gone past, we used to talk about a high dose protocol, and used to give yourself about 3 or 4 minutes that if you saw no effect whatsoever, that you used to go ahead and use to dart the animal again. With the new kind of doses that are currently being used, where a much, much lower dose of opioid is being used now, in combination with an alpha-2 agonist like midatomidine, sometimes you can have animals really only showing effects after 6, 8, 9 minutes, where they starting to walk a little bit rather than becoming recumbent, and you can actually restrain them on their feet. So there has been a radical revolution in terms of the way animals are being darted at the moment. So it becomes a question, you have to interpret your drug dosage that you've used as well, and to define and decide, has it got enough? Am I going to be able to get it? Do I need to make up another dart and give it either a partial DART amount or a full DART amount again. And that becomes a clinical call that you have to make.
Yeah, so I think while we're talking about the different drug combinations, one of the things to obviously consider is that there's been a big movement from where they started with the anesthetics to where we are now with concentrating these drugs, producing these highly concentrated drugs to fit into a DART. So there's obviously limitations. What are the limitations to DART size practically? So what kind of DART sizes are you generally limited to so that you need to take into consideration that the drugs that you select actually can fit into those DARTs?
Okay, I think the standard size is usually between 2 or 3 milliliters in size, and that's the most appropriate size for Daniject, for new DARTs, for Matsumi, etc. But then there are also some guys who are using much smaller volumes in terms of darting buffalo with 1 cc darts, but then they're only just getting enough to go down, or they're semi-habituated and they actually just go down with that small volume. Dart sizes of anything from 4 or 5 cc's up are possible, but then you need to be much closer so that you're more assured of actually getting good dart placement and then good injection into a muscle mass. The larger the darts are, the more unwieldy, the more unpractical they become, and the less accurate they become. So 10 cc darts are available, and they're for use in terms of injecting antibiotics, etc. But they're really only practical within a BOMA situation rather than in a free-living wild situation.
Great. I think that's pretty much all the questions. The last question from my side is more a personal question. In all your years of experience with all these different DART systems, what's been your favorite DART system to work with? What would be your go-to system?
I started with Telinject. I then went on to Daniject, and I really liked Daniject for certain circumstances. For darting out of a helicopter, for me, the best was the old capture gun that you saw there without any sights on, where you could get really close. And I used to use old capture guns, or what is not even made anymore with those spring-loaded Kruger Park darts. Very accurate. When you hit the target, you knew that they were going to go off. But quite difficult to use. Nowadays, I'd probably say the easiest and most effective is probably going to be a toss-up between a new dart and a Matsumi dart. And the Matsumi darts are really doing well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Richard. Thanks so much for taking time out. I know you're sitting in quarantine at home. So is I think much of our webinar team is also in quarantine. But I guess those are the times we live in. But yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this. It's been a very, very informative talk, and hopefully we can convince you to do another one for us in the near future. For everyone else that would like to see the recording, just keep an eye on your email. You'll get the link there. I see the link wasn't for the CBD points, and the attendance register wasn't posted, but don't worry, we will send it out. Oh, there we go. The vet link has just posted it, but if you've missed it, we will send it out by email. And then keep an eye out on our social media and on our website, www.wildfarm.co.za. We have a great webinar lined up for next month on primate anesthesia by another colleague of ours, Dr. Martien van Zyl Langhout. So keep an eye out for that one and register. And keep safe. Everyone have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, Richard.
Thank you, Liesl. Thanks, everyone else. Good night.
Okay. Good night.